January 3rd of 1956, and what I want to talk about this morning is this, and give me the title slide if you don't mind, John. I want to talk about a worldview. I am not. I'm not coming through, am I?
Not yet.
Hello, everybody. There we go. Got it. Are we broadcasting? Give me camera one if you don't mind when you get a chance. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I want to welcome everybody that is watching on the internet to Cross Point Church in Fort Worth, Texas. And we're glad to have you join us. And I think it's great that you can come our direction and we can come your way by the internet, by technology, but even better would be the opportunity to meet you in person. And so if you have any questions about Christianity, about the Bible, about God, about faith, or life in general, contact us through the information that you find on the bottom of the computer screen, and we'll get back in touch with you right away. Again, it's an honor and a privilege to be with you guys today, and so I would love the chance to meet you in person sometime. The address is on the screen, and please feel free to stop by here, Cross Point Church, anytime. We're in service every Sunday morning at 10:30, and we'd love to meet you and have a chance to make your acquaintance. All right, I want to go back to January 3rd of 1956. We're talking about the worldview and does it really matter? And on that date, January the 3rd of 1956, a group of 5 missionaries landed their airplane on a sand barge in one of the most remote locations in all of Ecuador, part of the Amazon rainforest. And the reason that they went there was because they felt that God was leading them to evangelize a group of Indians, only about 600 people in total, called the Harangi natives, the Harangi Indians. They really weren't even known by the name Harangi Indians. They were actually known by the name Aka, because Aka is the pejorative for something extremely negative. And as a matter of fact, the word Aka actually means savages. And that's exactly what these people were. They were savages of the worst kind. They were known for not only killing warring tribes in neighboring countries, but they were also known for killing one another. And so they were extremely barbaric and primitive. And so this group of 5 missionaries, and the missionary in the middle is a man by the name of Jim Elliot. You may have heard the name Jim Elliot before. He's the man that made the statement, "A person is no fool to give up the things he cannot keep for the things that he cannot lose." He is no fool who gives up the things he cannot keep for those things he cannot lose. 5 days later, after landing their aircraft on that sandbar next to the Curare River, they encountered these Aka Indians. That morning, January the 8th, they sent out a radio dispatch. They touched home base and told those that were praying for them that contact had been made and everything was progressing well. Well, by that afternoon, the Aka Indians met these 5 missionaries there at the Curare River, and they pulled out their spears and they impaled each and every one of those missionaries. As a matter of fact, they decapitated some of them. These men were, they believed, sent by God to evangelize the Aka Indians, and the Aka Indians killed them 5 days later. The widow of Jim Elliot is a lady by the name of Elizabeth Elliot. And Elizabeth Elliot was so convinced that God had in fact called her husband and called her to this missionological task. One of the most difficult assignments God could ever give anybody. She buried her husband after the remains had been recovered. One of the missionaries they never found. But after the remains had been recovered, she buried her husband. She teamed with a sister of one of the other missionaries that had been killed. And together these 2 ladies did not go into hiding, did not go back to the comforts of their own homes, but instead they continued the call and they went to the Aka Indians. They went to the very people that had killed their husband and or brother, respectively. That's nothing other than the miraculous grace and mercy of God. God had to give her a heart for this. And the story is told, and you can see her there among the Aka Indians, and notice that these Indians are now dressed because they, of course, at the time contact was made, did not wear any clothing whatsoever. But she went and she began working among this group of people. And one of the first young ladies to make contact and begin dialogue with Elizabeth Elliot after language and common understanding could be established was a lady by the name of Duyama. And Duyama actually became the very first convert. You can see Elizabeth Elliot having a conversation with Duyama. And as a result of the impact made by the gospel on Duyama, many people, now watch this, many people in that village were converted to Christ, and even some of the people that killed their loved ones came to Christ. There's no power like the power of love, God's love. And so Elizabeth Elliot decided, and you can see, I think that's a fantastic picture. You can see there in the upper left-hand corner, Duyama being baptized into the Christian faith. Out of darkness into his marvelous light, he has shown you, oh man, what is good. And just recently, Duyama passed away, and you can see her picture now in the bottom right-hand corner just a short time before her death. And she retained the faith up until her dying day. Elizabeth Elliot brought Duyama to the United States because she was going to begin raising funds for their Operation Aka. And so when Duyama came to America, she landed in New York City. And when she was in New York City, Elizabeth Elliot began taking her around to see the sights. The millions of light bulbs that are Times Square. She took her to see the hot dog stands and understand, this is all foreign to her. The fire hydrant, what is that? She saw the taxi cabs scurrying the passengers about the 5 boroughs of New York City. And then she took her to the top of the Empire State Building. And from the top of the Empire State Building, she could look out and she could span the incredible scene that is New York City. The Eastern River and the Hudson River. And interestingly enough, Elizabeth Elliot says that while she was taking Duyama on this tour, Duyama, now listen to this, remained completely expressionless. She had a flat affect. She showed no signs of understanding anything. And again, she's coming from the Amazon rainforest. She'd never seen a hot dog, let alone a vending stand. And she's looking out, and now she's standing on top of the largest building in New York City at that time. And she says nothing. I mean, literally, not only does she remain expressionless, she says nothing. Until finally, Elizabeth Elliot takes her down the Empire State Building, and they begin walking the sidewalks of Midtown Manhattan once again. And when Duyama looks into a tree and she sees a white object in that tree, and for the first time in all of the tour, she turns to Elizabeth Elliot and she says, "What kind of bird is that?" She sees New York City in all of its luster, with all of its overwhelming sights and sounds, and says nothing. But when she sees a white bird, she echoes her first words, "What kind of bird is that?" Why did she do that? Because Duyama found something she could relate to. Are you hearing what I'm saying? She found something that she understood because she found something that she could relate to. Every person in this room this morning, I don't care who you are, what your age might be, what your experiences might be, every person in this room has what is called a worldview. And that word worldview has become commonly used in our contemporary culture. But I've discovered in the usage of the word worldview, very few people really understand what that concept means. Very few people really have an elementary understanding of the worldview. The term worldview really came from what was called German idealism. It was a phrase that was coined by a German philosopher named Immanuel Kant. Has anybody heard of Immanuel Kant? German idealism was a philosophical movement that began in the late 1800s and moved into the early 1900s. And so what Immanuel Kant, this philosopher, was trying to do was he was trying to bridge two dominant philosophical thoughts in the world at that time. Two philosophical thoughts that seemingly were on the opposite ends of the spectrum. All of this came from the age of enlightenment. He was first of all trying to give rationalization to the idea that the only way somebody can know anything at all is through reason and logic. It's called rationalism. The only way that you can know truth, the only way that you can understand reality is through logic and through implementing the laws of deduction. He's trying to bridge the gap between rationalism and empiricism. Empiricism, the very opposite, says that the only way you can gain knowledge and the only way you can grasp truth and understanding is through utilizing your five senses. And so notice one of them speaks about using your mind, the other one speaks about using your senses, and he's trying to bring a convergence to those two. And in the process, give us a worldview. What is a worldview? You've got philosophers, you've got theorists, there are theologians, there are sociologists that are trying to give us an adequate definition when it comes to the fundamental elements of a worldview. The problem is this: when trying to give a definition to the worldview each person has, that worldview is extremely biased. And when something is biased, it becomes hopelessly individual. Why do I say that? I say that because that's where we are in the United States at this time. We are a nation that places more emphasis on individual opinion than it does the pursuit of truth. There was a book written by a man named James Sire. The book was called Naming the Elephant. It's a great read when it comes to understanding worldviews. And he said there are basically two components to every worldview. There is the presupposition, and then there is also the question. There is the assumption, and there is the question. And he says that the assumption is given as a response to the question. The problem is, most of the time, the assumption involves no critical thinking. Most of the time, our assumptions are inherited. They are not discovered. I want to say that one more time. Most of the time, our assumptions are not discovered. Instead, they are inherited. I believe what I believe because my mother told me. I believe what I believe because my church told me. I believe what I believe because my teacher told me. And in this country, we have lost the ability to think for ourselves. And that is why the masses are being pulled away from the centrality of the biblical Judeo-Christian concept that brought this country unparalleled prosperity in the first place. You see, assumptions are traditionally considered to be right or wrong or completely off base. Assumptions, lots of time, many times, are considered to be conscious, subconscious, sometimes consistent and inconsistent. One thing I know about myself is my worldview is oftentimes extremely inconsistent. But in response to the seeking for truth through rationalism, through logic, through deduction, something very dangerous started to emerge in this country beginning in the 1950s, the middle of the 20th century. Society in the middle of the 20th century became extremely frustrated with the idea that reason had not solved all the world's problems. We used reason and still we saw the rise of Adolf Hitler. We used reason and we still saw the dropping of the atomic bomb. And so when reason seemed to fail in answering the questions of people pursuing something of meaning, there was a philosophical movement that began to emerge that we today call postmodernism. What is postmodernism? Postmodernism is a philosophical movement that is exemplified in this statement. What is right for you may not be right for me. What is right for you may be true for you, but it's not necessarily true for me. Here's a problem. Postmodernism is characterized by the impossibility of knowing truth. And truth, by its very definition, is universal, it's necessary, it's inflexible, and it's invariant. And if we do not have truth, how can we survive as a society? I want to read to you a quote by a guy named Harold Pinter. Harold Pinter, and give me that quote if you don't mind, was one of the most influential writers in all of English history. He was a playwright, he was an actor, he was a director. Listen to what he said, because this is the mindset. Now listen to me. This is the mindset. Before I say that, let me say this. The Church of England, the Anglican Church, did a poll back in 2015. And in that poll, they published their findings, and they said, in England, 22% of all English people don't even believe Jesus Christ existed. 22% of all people said they don't believe Jesus Christ even existed. Is it any wonder when you've got people like this writing these kinds of statements and influencing the thinking of an entire nation? This is what Pinter said. There are no hard distinctions between what is real and what is unreal. I want to say that one more time. There are no hard distinctions between what is real and what is unreal, between what is true and what is false. A thing is not necessarily either true or false. It can be both true and false. Now, I'm not even going to go into the laws of negation, how that A cannot equal B in the same sense and at the same time. But there's where we are. There's what our kids are being taught in public school. I told you, my grandson came home from class not long ago, and he told his mother that if he wants to be a girl tomorrow, it's perfectly fine for him to go to school and identify as a girl on Tuesday and revert back to being a boy on Wednesday. Ladies and gentlemen, we've lost our minds because we've pushed God out of the public forum. This is what Pinter said. Basically, he said it's impossible to know what is true. Now, watch this. Now, get this. Pinter said it's impossible to know what is truth. Do you realize that within itself is contradictory, because Pinter was making a truth claim? He was saying it's impossible to know the truth. I'm telling you the truth. It's contradictory. And so what happens is postmodernism fails to distinguish matters of truth, because truth has been relegated to statements of opinion. Everybody heard Plato. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Let me ask you, is that an opinion or is that a truth? Well, the statement may be a truth, but the actualization of that statement becomes opinion. Am I making any sense at all? Here's where we are. Let's look where we are as a country. If I would say to you, rape is always wrong, is that an opinion or is that a truth statement? Come on. Is rape always wrong? Is that a truth claim or is that just an opinion? See, the problem with postmodernism is postmodern rejects any statement that involves absolutes. Anytime you use a word like always or never or no or must or only, the postmodernist says, I want nothing to do with what you're saying. Here's the problem. Rape is always wrong because rape can never be right. Therefore, to say rape is always wrong is a truth statement. It involves no opinion. That is, unless you think there are times rape is permissible. And rape is permissible in many Western African countries. I've been there, I know. The question is this: is morality designated to specific peoples and other peoples can adopt an entirely different set of morals? What is the moral construct by which all people have intrinsic value? The only way that you can say all mankind has intrinsic value is by saying that man was created in the image of God. All other value is extrinsic. it comes from the outside. That is to say, my mother tells me I have value, but guess what? The value that I have, that my mother thinks I have, isn't the same value that Paul thinks I have. I promise you, Paul thinks his daughter has more value than me in this sense. He has a relationship with her he does not enjoy with me. So understand that if our value does not come intrinsically, that being through our Creator, then your value is now determined by your environment. Am I making any sense? Or am I boring you to tears up here? I can't tell. So here we are. What is the threat with postmodernism? Postmodernism says if you use words like never, no, only, maybe, when you use words like that, you cannot know what truth is. Here's the problem. Give me the slide if you don't mind. Acts chapter 4 and verse 12 says, there's no name given under heaven whereby man must be saved. There's no name given under heaven whereby man must be saved. That's a truth claim, and it's an absolute. Let's go one step further. St. John chapter 14 and verse 6, Jesus says, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life. Remember, truth is exclusive. There's the problem we've got. Everybody thinks truth is a matter of opinion. No, truth by its very nature is exclusive. Jesus understood that when he said, I am the way, I am the truth, I am the life, I am truth. And because I am truth, no man can come to the Father except by me. Truth is exclusive. And I believe that Christ, he confronts this postmodern idea and mentality, and when he speaks in truth statements and makes truth claims, we dismiss him as just another religious leader. And so many times here in this country, we now see Eastern culture and Eastern mindset invading our very way of thinking in our universities. Let me give you another quote here. It's by a guy named Alvin Toffler. Toffler was a genius. He was what they call a futurist. I've got a picture of him. He died, 15, 20 years ago, something like this. But long before it ever was an idea, he wrote about technology. He wrote about AI. He wrote about cloning, various forms of communication. And this is what Toffler said. He said, every person, now listen to this. Here are the implications of this. Every person carries in his head a mental model of the world. Every person carries in his head a mental model of the world. In other words, you have in your brain what you think the world should be like. And he said, your mental model is this, a subjective representation of external reality. Postmodernism eliminates absolute truth, making everything, including your empirical senses, God. In other words, the only way you can know truth is by experiencing something through your five senses. And that totally takes God, who is an absolute and beyond your five senses, out of the conversation. How many know who Friedrich Nietzsche was? How many know who Friedrich Nietzsche was? A philosopher that came out of German idealism. How many heard the phrase, God is dead? Give me the slide. God is dead. God remains dead. We're the ones that killed him. It was a philosophical statement. You see, this guy was a hardened, adamant, no, watch this. He was an atheist. His grandfathers on both sides were ministers. His father was a pastor. And he declared war on absolutes when he declared war on God. He said, concerning the concept of God, that God is nothing but a human construct. In other words, we invented God to impose our moral beliefs on somebody else. I want Russell to act a certain way. I want David to act a certain way. Therefore, I invent dogma and doctrines taken from God, whoever that concept might be, and I impose them on these men because I want to control them. Therefore, religion becomes the opiate of the masses. Karl Marx. So what happens? When judgments are made based on individuality, which is the postmodern philosophy, there is not only the loss of truth, there's also the loss of discernment. And there's where we are in our country right now. So let me give you a quote this morning from a great Catholic priest. He lived back in the 1200s. His name was Thomas Aquinas. Aquinas was recognized as being a doctor of the church, which means he made such significant theological contributions that he was given the title of doctor. This is what Aquinas said. He said, it's the task of the philosopher to make distinctions. It's the task of the philosopher to make distinctions. Now, let me ask you this question this morning. What is a philosopher and what does philosophy mean? Everyone in this room is a philosopher. Every person in this room has a philosophy. That is to say, you have a way of thinking. And he said every philosopher is obligated to make distinctions. What he's saying is, he's saying this: truth depends on your ability to differentiate between this and that. It goes much deeper than just right or wrong. You see, there's where we are as a country. As a country, we can't tell the difference between right and wrong. Why? Because we can't tell the difference between a man or a woman. And the result of being unable to differentiate between a man and a woman, between this and that, between right and wrong, is in 15 it was, gay marriage became the law of the land in this country. And it became the law of this land, and we called it equal. It's why? Because we aren't able to differentiate between this and that. And being able to differentiate between this and that is a fundamental principle of establishing a worldview. So what I'm saying this morning is a worldview is something far more than just clearly intellectual. Let me go back to James Sire one more time. He said this: a worldview is not just a set of basic concepts. He said it's a fundamental orientation of the heart. A worldview is not just a set of basic concepts, but it's the fundamental orientation of the heart. Only authentic biblical Christianity gives us, in theological terms, the affirmation we need to understand who we are inherently. And what is the fundamental orientation of your heart? What is the fundamental orientation of my heart as it regards Jesus Christ? Is he just a Savior, or is he more than that? Has he become your Lord? Let me give you a quote by C.S. Lewis. He wrote in his book, The Weight of Glory, regarding the role that God plays in his life as a worldview. He said this: I believe in Christianity as I believe in the sun. I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything. I want this to sink in. I believe in the sun because I've seen it. Not only because I've seen it, but I believe in the sun also because by the sun I see everything else. You understand what he's saying? It's one thing to open your eyes in the morning and see the sun, but without that sun you can't see the parking lot. Without that sun you can't see the trees. And there's where we have a breakdown in American Christianity. We want to look at Christ, but we don't want to see our lives through the filter of Christ's demands of lordship. We want the benefit without the obligation. And so we introduce in church our preferences. Now, is there a difference between truth and preference? Once again, why did Duyama say, hey, what kind of bird is that? Because Duyama could relate to what it was she was looking at. Worldviews are something all people can relate to. And even though they are unique, even though they are subject to each person's interpretation, everyone has a worldview. Some people make their worldview about geography. Other people make their worldview about money. Other people make it about economics. So how do we draw that distinction? Let me give you an example. Just an easy example. We know that we're going to celebrate Thanksgiving. We know that Thanksgiving is the result of the explorers that came to the New World. Remember, the explorers, they came to the New World. And when they were setting sail from Europe, they would identify this parcel of land as what? I just gave it to you. They would identify these continents as the New World. Now here's the irony. When they got here, they met a group of people called the Indians, the natives. But to the Indians and to the natives, this was anything but a new world. You understand the point I'm trying to make? To one group, it's called the New World. To the other group, it's simply their land that they've lived on for all of their lives. Viewpoints influence worldviews. So now when it comes, I promise I'm not going to hold you much longer. Everybody's glad about that. I want you to look at John with me. I want you to look at John with me. John chapter 8. Because some people, when it comes to a worldview, some people say a worldview is based on theism, deism, agnosticism, atheism, pantheism, polytheism, monotheism. You could go down the list. Some people say it's about money, it's about nationality, it's about all other kinds of things. But I think Jesus gives to every person the basis of a worldview, and it's found in St. John chapter 8. Now let me say this. There are millions of people around the world that criticize the teachings of Christ. And they accuse him of everything imaginable. I was reading just the other day, and I was teaching the kids the leaders on Friday night about the claim that was made by, who was it? The Roman historian? It wasn't Thallus. I think it might have been Celsus. And Celsus published that Jesus was born of a drunken Roman soldier. Jesus, he said, was a bastard. Everybody's got their opinion of who Jesus is. But here's the one thing I must say about Jesus. Whether you love him or despise him, nobody has ever criticized him as being confused about his identity. Are we on the same page? Now I want you to look at St. John chapter 8 and verse 12 with me. Jesus speaks again and he says, now watch this, I am the light of the world. Don't miss it. Underscore it. He says, I am the light of the world. He that follows after me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. Now let's skip ahead to verse number 14. Jesus answered and said to them, even if I bear witness of myself, my witness is true. If I have to testify of myself, don't worry, my testimony is true, for I know where I came from and I know where I am going. I believe in those two verses, Jesus gives us the three foundational principles of a worldview. He says, I am the light of the world. When he says, I am the light of the world, he is saying, I know who I am. How can he say, I know who I am? Because of what he says in verse number 14, I know where I came from and I know where I am going. May I say this morning? Unless you know where you came from and know where you're going, it's impossible to know who you are. Unless you know, I didn't say unless you know where you came from and know where you are, it's impossible to know where you're going. I didn't say that. I said unless you know where you came from and know where you're going, it's impossible to know who you are, hence what God's plan is for your life right now. So he begins with origin. He says, I know where I came from. Origin, the problem of anthropogeny. Where does man come from? Because when it comes to the concept of where does man come from, you've got basically three schools of thought. The first one is called theism. Theism is simply the outworking of a solitary being. That is to say, I came from the voice of God. That's theism. Strangely enough, you've got three major religions that subscribe to theism. You've got Christianity, you've got Judaism, and you've got Islam. These are the only monotheistic religions in the world. And interestingly enough, all three of those religions say that the divine, that being God, whoever God might be, actually takes a vested interest in his creation. Then you've got Eastern philosophy. This is what I'm dealing with, guys. I'm spending my time dealing with, these guys are smart. All right, they don't think like we think in the West. So here I am, I'm reading up on Hinduism, and I'm reading up on Buddhism, and I'm reading up on Taoism, and I'm reading up on all the isms of the world that can't answer the question man has, why am I here? Eastern philosophy says the universe itself is divine. That is to say, all things are God. Let me give this to you. You probably didn't know this, so I want to give it to you. I think it's so interesting the way that God works. When Jesus said in St. John 14 and verse 6, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life, he spoke that directly to Thomas. It was Thomas that went to India as the first missionary. India is the country of 330 million gods. He sent Thomas, who heard directly, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life," to the people that are trying to find truth, and they're trying to find truth in 330 million deities, and they ultimately just decapitated him. So what does Eastern philosophy say? Eastern philosophy says the material world always existed. Therefore, you and I are not a product of any purposeful design. Eastern mysticism, humanism. Eastern philosophy basically says that human beings splintered off from some God quality, but we really don't know what that God quality is. So you've got theism, you've got Eastern philosophy when it comes to origin, and then you've got, of course, naturalism. And when I talk about naturalism, I'm speaking about materialism. That is to say, I'm speaking about atheism that in its doctrine teaches evolution. Evolution. What is evolution? Evolution simply says at the beginning of time, whenever that was, you had all kinds of impersonal scientific laws interact with one another accidentally, and the outcome was this exquisite design that we call Earth. In other words, from nothing came nothing, right? By nothing, through nothing, with nothing, for nothing, all things. You see, here's the difference. I've got a cousin, she lives in Germany, and she doesn't understand, how can you guys believe in a God? She's coming next year. I haven't seen her for 35, 40 years. She's coming to visit next year, and she asked my uncle this question. She said, how can you guys actually believe in 2020, during this time of enlightenment, education, and technology, how can you actually believe there is a God? You've got basically only two possibilities. Evolution says this. If somebody ever says to you, how can you believe there's a God? Just remember this. Are you ready? If somebody starts to mock you at McDonald's over your Big Mac and says, how can you believe in a God? Why are you wasting your time praying over that thing? Here's what you say to them. We've got only two possibilities. Possibility number one, from nothing came everything, or from something came something. Evolution teaches from nothing came everything. Theism teaches from something, that being God, came something. I don't know about you, but you've got to suspend the laws of logic to believe that nothing produced something. And we also have to understand this. This is what you're going to hear time and time again. Well, the Bible, it's been proven scientifically that the Bible's bogus. Can I tell you why that's not true? The Bible's not a book of science. It never pretends to be a book of science. When you open up Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1, it gives you the ontological argument, that being God is. If you don't want to accept it, try to reason him away through your beaker, your microscope, or your Petri dish. But it's the fool that said in his heart, there is no God. Why? Because the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth forth his handiwork. Day unto day he uttereth his speech, and night unto night he shows his knowledge. So here we go. Your origin. I promise I'm almost done. I lied earlier. I promise I'm almost done. You have your origin. Number two, what did Jesus say? I'm the light of the world. Why did he know that he was the light? It spoke to his purpose. This teleological design. He knew his order. He knew why he came. Let me say it this way. Listen to me. There's a difference between fate and purpose. Most of us, how do I say this? Most of us know that we were created. That is our fate. But we don't know what we were created for. Now, let me give you a simple analogy. It may be the fate of a rusty hammer to end up in a garbage pile. It may be the fate of a rusty hammer to be discarded at the city dump. That may be its fate, but its purpose was to drive nails. There's a difference between fate and purpose. And I am concerned that Christianity states God's people were created for a purpose, but because they made a choice to reject their Creator, their fate, not their purpose, becomes their reality. And that fate, when rejecting God, is eternal alienation from their Creator. So what has he created us for? Micah 6 and 8, I've shown you, O man, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. Eastern religion says that you were created from a divine principle, whatever that principle might be. You are a tension between the human and the divine, and somehow what is human in you and what is divine in you must coexist in this state of eternal tension. And then, of course, naturalism, evolution. Evolution says there is no design, there is no purpose. Once again, it was just a great big cosmic burp. Almost said something different. Naturalism says that we are the product of something unintentional. Therefore, if we're the product of something unintentional, if we were never designed to be, how can we have purpose? It's the myth of progress. Evolution says it knows the trajectory of mankind. It knows which way we're going. But evolution is obviously, by its very basis, purposeless. Therefore, evolution cannot give us direction because evolution has no basis in purpose. And then finally, there's destiny. There's origin, there is purpose, and there is destiny. And only Christianity gives us conclusive truth when it regards destiny. Eastern philosophy says your goal is enlightenment. Try to get to nirvana. But the only way that you can get to nirvana in Eastern philosophy is by suffering for your wrongdoing on earth through karma. And when karma punishes you, you come back through that cyclical process called reincarnation. Enjoy that one. Your goal is transcendence. But you'll never be transcendent. You'll never enjoy nirvana because you'll always be stuck as a dog, cat, or human. And then, of course, naturalism, because naturalism says you came from nowhere and you're nothing but the product of an accident. The only thing that you can hope for is the universal end, because in the law of entropy, ultimately all things come to a close. This is it. I promise I'm done here. I promise I'm done here. I promise. You know, you've heard me say it before. I'm like a real estate agent. I've got a bunch of different closings. So what's the conclusion that we embrace? The fundamental question of any true searcher is, what conclusion do I embrace? Once again, let me say truth is inflexible, it's universal, it's invariant, and it's necessary. James Orr. Give me the picture of James Orr. I don't know if I've got a picture of James Orr. James Orr, I think I do. What's that? Okay, I don't have James Orr. He outlined how can we understand origin, purpose, and destiny. And this is a completely different teaching, and I won't teach it here. Yes. He says there's three criteria to knowing origin, purpose, and destiny. Three criteria to knowing origin, purpose, and destiny. Number one, there's got to be empirical adequacy. What do I mean when I say empirical adequacy? What we read must make sense. It must be true. How do we know it's true? Because it makes sense. It's logical. Not only that, empirical adequacy. I gave this to the leaders on Friday night. Do you know how many extra biblical, non-biblical pieces of evidence there are that show the existence of the biblical Jesus? There must be empirical adequacy. It's got to be. Here's the thing. Jesus never said just jump off a cliff blindly. He said, respond to the revelation of truth that you've been given. How did he give revelation of truth? My goodness, there's 300 prophecies alone that speak to the life, ministry, death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. Tell me how 700 years before the prophet knew that Jesus would be sold for 30 pieces of silver. How did he know that? How did he know that Jesus would be raised as a child in Egypt? How did he know that he would ride into Jerusalem on the back of a donkey? How did he know that at the crucifixion, Jesus would not have the bones of his body broken when every person in the Roman Empire that underwent crucifixion had their bones broken? How did he know that? That is empirical adequacy. Number one. Number two, there must be logical consistency. What I believe in my heart must make sense in my mind. I had one of these Easterners ask me the other night. She said, how can we call Jesus truth? And I said to her, don't you dare call Jesus truth unless you follow these guidelines. Because if you do, you're committing intellectual suicide and spiritual treason. You can't say Jesus is truth until you've discovered for yourself that he's truth. And then number three, that is the third point, experiential relevance. You can only know that he's truth by experiencing him for yourself. So let me give this to you, and I promise this is it. Here we go. I want to give you the words, and I was only up here for 40 minutes. You guys like, man, that's the longest 40 minutes of my life. This is what I teach these kids. Man, they're just like, they're like sponges, man. Just like sponges. There was a British evangelist by the name of Gipsy Smith. Don't put his picture up just yet. There it is. Rodney Gipsy Smith. And this is what Gipsy Smith said. He said there are 5 gospels. You can put it up now. That's fine. There's 5 gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the Christian. And most people will never read the first 4. What do they read when they read you? What do they see when they see you? 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 2. Our epistle is written on the hearts, known, seen, witnessed, and read by all men. It's 5 gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the Christian. And most people will never read the first 4. So why is it that we leave the gospel? Why is it that we leave our Christianity in the pew when we leave at 12 o'clock on Sundays? I want to say that one more time. That's a good statement. Why is it that we leave our faith in the church and only pick it up when we come back 176 hours later? I think the answer is found in the words of the satirist, the Christian layman, the Christian apologist, G.K. Chesterton. This is what Chesterton said. Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. Christianity has been found difficult and left untried. And notice the picture of the cigar in his hand. I loved it. Amen. Christianity has not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and left untried. That's powerful.
Absolutely.
That's powerful. What is your worldview? Do you know your origin? Do you know your destiny? Only then will you know your purpose. I promise next time I'll resume with a Bible study. You like this, Faye? Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is great. Very much so.
I just gave you what I teach these kids. Now, I might give you the one I taught on Friday night, because that's all about archaeological evidence and empirical evidence that Jesus really did exist. I think it's really good. You know, these Roman historians that are writing about this God that the people came together and worshiped on the first day of the week, and they shared common food, not of a mystical kind, but common food. I love how one of the Roman historians, from the Greco-Roman world, he talks about these followers of Christus devoted themselves to the idea that they would never die. And as such, they were devoted to a superstitious, what did he call it? He called it he called it some kind of superstition, a mysterious superstition. What was the mysterious superstition he was talking about? He was talking about the resurrection. People are willing to die for this superstition. What was the superstition? They were willing to die because he rose from the dead. Anyway, that's it. That's all I've got to say.